Blane Stacy. I work for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. I am a soil health educator for the Water Quality Division within the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. Today, I have a demonstration, but I want to ask you first, what can we do on our land to help our water? And that's what we're going to demonstrate today. Here in the Lake Thunderbird watershed, we have a lot of different soils, we have a lot of different land uses, and each and every one of these land uses can determine or dictate how it affects our water quality, especially within our wonderful lake behind us. So I have 5 different land uses. Over here, this is just plain concrete. This is what would represent an urban landscape, your shopping mall parking lots, your highways, sidewalks, etc. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we would have a native plant community. This is native grasses, forbs, and legumes that are present in a natural native setting. It's not plowed, it's not grazed too heavily. Next to that, we have a piece of my front yard, but it's not your traditional front yard. That's a front yard that's mown a little bit taller. I don't use pesticides on that part. I don't spray anything with it. That's just a little bit different method of land management when it comes to our yards. In the center, I have what would be considered a traditional yard. That has herbicide used on it. We spray for weeds. It gets mown 2 inches tall every 2 weeks in the summer. Has a lot of traffic, and the soil is a little bit compact because of that. And then as a reference here, we have what would be considered either farm ground or in an urban setting, that's a construction site. That's where the soil's been disturbed. Maybe they're scraping soil for a new home, clearing land for new buildings. But that soil that is denuded of vegetation, doesn't have any root structure in the soil, it's just open and bare. So to show how each and every land use is affected by the rainfall in our watershed, we're just going to rain a good old-fashioned Oklahoma thunderstorm on each one of these land uses. Underneath we have jars. The jars in the front, that will catch the runoff. That is water that's not soaked into the ground. That's water that's not captured by the land uses. And that's what ends up in our storm drains. That's what ends up in our local urban creeks and ultimately make their way to the lake. The jars located in the back, that's going to show the infiltration. Now that's just a word that means that's a water that is captured in the soil, or water that actually makes it through that layer of soil in what would be considered subsoil infiltration. So immediately I notice the impact of the rainfall is causing some backsplash here on this bare exposed soil. Every time a raindrop impacts that soil, it's a miniature explosion. It impacts the soil, fractures those soil particles, and makes it actually easier for that soil particle to become dislodged and wash away. On our concrete, we're actually getting some splash from the bare soil onto the concrete, so that can impact our water quality and our runoff as well. As more rain falls, we notice that on our native soil, our native grasses, the soil is protected. There's actually a cushion protecting that soil from the impact of that rainfall. The rain falls softer. On our, I don't want to call it loosely managed, but on the soil that's allowed grass to grow taller in our yard, that much more thatch, that much more grass growth provides more cushion than would be present in our shortgrass. Immediately we notice massive amounts of runoff. And not only do we have water leaving the ground, leaving that land use, but it's carrying soil sediment with it. And the soil sediment has nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, potassium, and magnesium that if they don't stay in the soil, wash away and end up in our water. So it's important that we keep our soil where it belongs, up on the land, in our yards, in our construction zones. We don't want it to wash away and end up in our lake. That's where we get some of our water quality issues. So we've just had a classic 1.25 inch rainfall in about 10 minutes, a classic Oklahoma cloudburst. And let's just look down the line and see how this rainfall affected each land use. So we'll start on this end, right here where the concrete is. Concrete lost almost 100% of its water as runoff. But what's surprising is the color of that water. I think we had some splash coming over from our bare soil, but that's a classic issue that we have in a lot of our paved areas where we build homes and shopping centers. You know, there's bare soil and then there's concrete right next to it. We kind of get a negative feedback loop. So even if the soil is dislodged to another land use, we're still losing a lot of sediment in both situations. And as you would expect, very minimal infiltration, but Mother Nature will find a way. If you've seen cracks in the sidewalk, it will capture a little bit of rain, but ultimately there's other ways we can mitigate that by permeable concrete or environmentally friendly concrete that has larger pore spaces that can allow water to soak in. So here's our construction site. It's amazing that even though this soil was loose, it wasn't compacted, it wasn't pressed down. This is soil that would be considered fluffy and aerated, behaved exactly like the concrete did. Almost no infiltration. It probably captured a little bit of water, soak it in the top inch, inch and a half, but ultimately we lost over 75% of that water as runoff. And it carried a lot of our nutrients with it. It carried a lot of our nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and that water ends up in our rivers and our lakes, like Lake Thunderbird. That not only causes environmental issues with fish and other wildlife, but we have to spend money to clean that water up before you and I can drink it. There's another negative feedback loop of more sediment comes in, the more we have to spend to clean it up, the more your water bill goes up. So the more we can keep our soil up on the ground where it belongs, not only helps Mother Earth, but it helps my checkbook. And that's something we can all get behind, I think. Here in the center, this is that classic lawn that's mowed pretty short. The lawn crews come in, mow it every 2 weeks, has herbicide applied to it. The grass never gets more than 2 inches tall. So the roots never get more than 2 inches deep. I don't really have a good way to explain this, but the water moved through that soil so quickly it didn't capture any of it in that root zone where the grass needs it to grow. A lot of the times in the summer when our Bermuda grass lawns turn dormant, we have a hot and dry spell. That's because that mowed and sprayed grass doesn't have the ability to capture that water. It runs straight through it down until it hits either a restrictive layer like clay or a rock formation, and then it flows down that rock formation, becomes a spring somewhere else. So ultimately, I'd like to see more lawns like this. We don't have to mow it extremely short every time we mow. Let it get 2, 3, 4 inches tall. Not only is it more cushiony, I like to walk across my yard barefoot and have a nice springy grass layer, but it also, the roots grow deeper and it can capture more water in that top few inches of that soil. A lot less water made it through the back jar, and that just tells me that it's soaking up all that water like a sponge in that top 2 inches of that soil. And then this is what I really like. We did have a little bit of runoff. That's okay. That's natural. But look at the color of this water. Crystal clear. You know, our soil that had a little bit more impact, it let some soil slip away. So anytime we can have runoff that looks as crystal clear as that, that's clean water flowing into our watershed, flowing into our lake. And everybody can be happy about that. The fish enjoy the clean water. I like to swim in clean water. Everybody wins. And then, as expected, our native grass, has a really deep root system, a really tall cushion on top. soaked up quite a bit of water, minimal runoff. It lost a little bit of soil with it. Okay, so we have demonstrated how each land use impacts infiltration and runoff. So how does that impact me personally? So we know that runoff is bad. We know that nutrients in the runoff is bad. But let's go to your house or my house, and let's look at how our yard is losing a lot of water. You know, if we don't have the roots in the soil to capture that moisture, we're going to have to spend a lot more money irrigating, a lot more time and effort on yard maintenance, because if we can't capture the water when we get it for free, when it rains, we'll have to pay for it some other time. The color of the water doesn't concern me near as much because that's subsoil irrigation, but we're just losing a lot of water in that top 2 inches of soil. These two types of soil come 50 yards apart at my house. The only thing that I do different is this gets mown and sprayed, and that gets mown 2 inches taller, and it's not sprayed. This is something that we can all get behind. This is something we can do in our own homes. We spend less money on chemicals. The earthworms and the microorganisms that live in the soil, they can open up tunnels and dig pathways so more water can soak in. So we can grow more cushiony grass that we don't have to spend near as much money to upkeep. And we have a lot cleaner water leaving our house that ends up into a lot cleaner stream and a lot cleaner lake that we can all fish and swim and enjoy. So, we've discussed how water flows overland and ends up as runoff that can possibly end up in our beautiful lake. But let's discuss subsurface water that can also end up in our lake, and how each of our land uses affects that. Our bare soil behaved just like concrete, so we didn't have hardly any subsoil infiltration. Here in our traditional yard, our well-maintained, well-pesticide, well-chemically treated yard, had quite a bit of subsurface infiltration, but the soil lost some of its ability to clean that water. Soil is a natural filter. It's like a carbon filter for our water treatment, only we don't have to pay for it. So our traditional yard didn't really do a very good job of cleaning or scrubbing that water before it went through it. Our more environmentally friendly yard, you can notice that not only did we capture more of that water, but it's actually slowly dripping even as we speak. It slowed that water down. It got a chance to filter out larger particles of sediment, so this water soaks in through the ground, comes out as a spring somewhere else, and it's inherently cleaner, whether it pops out as a spring up on the hillside or it actually subsurface travels into the lake. That's cleaner water just by how we altered our land use. And then our classic native prairie is the best example. You know, it really does a great job of scrubbing that water, cleaning that water up before it ends up in the lake through subsurface pathways. You know, that's our true water cycle, not just the overland flow of water, but how water goes into the ground, goes through the soil, through the rock formations, comes back out either as springs, subsurface channels, or just pops straight up out of some of our streams.